Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this. Welcome to Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host, my name is Larry Erickson, and for the next half hour, I'm going to be a ranter and raconteur. I'm going to be talking about things that are important to me and I think are worthy of your attention. As always, any comments, questions, reactions, whatever to the show can be sent to me directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING @AOL.com. And if you didn't catch that, go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and you get the email address from there, or if you prefer, you can leave a comment there. As always, if you do send me email, please include something in the subject line to make it clear it's not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I am terrible about answering email, but you will get an answer. All right, with those traditional introductions out of the way, let's get to it, starting, as we always like to, with good news. Another one bites the dust. On Tuesday, November 4th, Federal District Court Judge Daniel Crabtree ruled that the ban on same-sex marriage in Kansas is unconstitutional. Oral arguments on this had taken place the previous Friday, but Crabtree declined to issue an immediate opinion. Now, based on the ruling that he did issue, the concern apparently was over the legal technicalities that the state of Kansas tried to raise about the legal term abstention. This refers to the cases when the federal courts should not be involved in a case because it interferes with a case in state courts going on at the same time. Now, there is a case before the Kansas State Supreme Court that involves a county judge who relied on the federal precedent to order county clerks to start issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. However, Crabtree determined the case before him and that case were not the same. They were sufficiently different, they didn't overlap, and so that his ruling would not interfere with that case. So he went ahead and on Tuesday did the right thing by declaring that the state of Kansas cannot enforce its ban on same-sex marriage. Now, Crabtree, as is common, stayed his own ruling until November 11th to give the state a chance to appeal. Hopefully, the state officials of Kansas will do what a number of other states have done, recognize the pointlessness of appealing this to a court which has already ruled on the matter, and just drop the whole thing. Something which it develops other states are not willing to do. South Carolina is now the only state in the Fourth Circuit that is still enforcing a ban on same-sex marriage. The state argues that the cases that were before the appeals court did not specifically address the provision of South Carolina's constitution that outlaws same-sex marriage, so therefore the appeals court decision does not apply to South Carolina. Now, there are several suits in both state and federal court there challenging the state's numbskull refusal to face reality. That reality, by the way, is one that's reflected in the announcement last month by Attorney General Eric Holder that the federal government now recognizes same-sex couples from 33 states as legally married and eligible for federal benefits. Because, yes, things have changed. Let me give you an example. Just 2 years ago, the Republican leadership in the Colorado State House twice torpedoed a bill to establish the right of civil unions. Well, this year, just 2 years later, the Gopper candidates for governor, U.S. Senate, and U.S. House in the state said nothing when the Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal from the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals decision knocking down bans on same-sex marriage, which essentially legalized same-sex marriage in Colorado. Same-sex marriage was a non-issue in this campaign. And in fact, Gopper insiders and political analysts in Colorado say that this rapid shift by the Republicans was necessary for their political survival. Polls in Colorado have gone from showing the state's voters to be evenly divided on the issue of same-sex marriage to supporting it by 61% in just 3 years. In fact, in Colorado, even the Goppers, even the conservatives, at least support civil unions. Meanwhile, Speaker of the House of Representatives John Boehner, Sir John of Orange, he openly campaigned for an openly gay Republican candidate in California, something that would have been unthinkable just a couple of years ago. By the way, we also have to remember, it's not just the right-wingers. It's not just the goppers that are doing this. Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, they have all, Obama's word was, evolved on this issue in the past couple of years. Meanwhile, too, we have the case of Creighton University. This is a Jesuit school in Omaha, Nebraska, which has decided to provide health benefits to the spouses of homosexual employees who were married in states where such marriages are now legal. This despite the facts that A, Jesuits are Catholics, as I'm sure you know, and B, same-sex marriage is not recognized in Nebraska, and in fact, Nebraska is not one of the states affected by recent federal court rulings. And what's more, it now turns out that Creighton is now one of 22 Jesuit universities that are doing this. The president of Creighton, his name is Reverend Timothy Lennon, he said the move was not meant to imply recognition or endorsement of same-sex marriage, but it was only a matter of being fair to the employees, which, after all, is, when you come right down to it, is pretty much all anybody's asking. Just basic human fairness. But, as I've said before, the dead enders will not give it up, even as they are sounding more and more desperate. For an example of that, a headline at a right-wing site called the Daily Signal said, and this, I'm quoting the headline, "The government should stop waging war on those against same-sex marriage." Because now that they are losing, now that their bigotry is no longer the law of the land, now that their bigotry is being rejected by a majority of the American people, they will whine and cry and bleat about how oppressed they are. Because no one, I guarantee no one, is quicker to cry and sniffle and mule about how mean you are and about how unfair it all is. No one is quicker to do that. No one is quicker to claim that they are the real victim here than a right-winger losing an argument. One last thing on this, by the way. Since same-sex marriage became legal in North Carolina a few weeks ago, at least, according to reports, at least 6 judges in the state have resigned from the bench, saying that they do not want to go against their Christian faith. To which I say, good. The thing is, if you have certain political or ethical or social or moral beliefs, those beliefs can prevent you from being able to do certain jobs. I mean, you cannot be a Christian Scientist and be a surgeon. You can't be a pacifist and be a soldier. You just can't. As a judge, your job, your role is to interpret and follow the law, not interpret and enforce your personal religious views. If you can't do that, you can't be a judge. And as far as I'm concerned, frankly, the same applies to the arguments that are raised claiming that people in private businesses, such as the example that often gets used as florists, that people in private businesses should be able to use their personal religious views to discriminate against same-sex couples. Now, first of all here, if that same argument today was raised against interracial couples, which in fact it was not that long ago. Not that long ago, you'd hear people say that, that's against God's law, and so I shouldn't have to accept that. If that argument was raised against an interracial couple today, we'd immediately say, you can't do that. I don't see why it should be any different here. If you are still using the example of a florist, if you are a florist operating a public business who provides flowers for weddings, you don't get to say, well, I'll sell flowers for the wedding of that couple, but I won't sell flowers for the wedding of that couple because I don't like the fact that they can get married. If you can't deal with that, you can't be a florist. The bottom line is, if you cannot sell your product or service to anyone who legally comes to you in order to buy it, You don't get to do that job. Religious freedom is not freedom to discriminate. Period. All right, moving on from there to a footnote to all of that I just talked about, which is that even as we are winning that battle, the battle on same-sex marriage, there are still others to be fought on that same general front. There is, for one example, no federal law protecting workers from being fired or otherwise discriminated against for being gay or lesbian. A proposed federal law to offer such protection for anyone working for an employer with at least 15 employees has been introduced in almost every Congress since 1994. It has never passed. This is despite the fact that, according to a new Harris poll, 2/3 of Americans support that kind of legislation, and 55% reject exemptions for any employers, including churches. Meanwhile, while some states have enacted their own protections, there are still 29 states where you can be legally fired for being gay or lesbian. And 32 states, you can be fired over issues of sexual identity. That is, like if you're a transsexual. The thing is, most Americans think this problem has already been solved. According to a 2013 poll, 69% of Americans think it is illegal to fire you for being homosexual. Those Americans are wrong. All right, finally, for now, a quick light note to take us to the break. I just have to offer a sincere happy birthday to someone who turned 60 this week. This dude. Yeah, folks, Godzilla is now 60. The first Godzilla film was released in Japan on November 3rd, 1954. The monster's name and the title of the film, and forgive me, Japanese speakers, for the terrible wrong I'm about to commit, but the name was Gozera, which is supposed to be a combination of gorilla and the Japanese word for whale. Godzilla became the name that we know him by with the 1956 release of an Americanized version of the film featuring Raymond Burr under the title Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Now, an interesting note about the American release is that while it did downplay the social commentary and the anti-nuclear weapons themes of the original, it was the first post-World War II major theatrical release in the United States that prevented Japanese in principal heroic roles or as sympathetic victims. Godzilla, 60 years old and still stomping. Happy B-Day, big guy. And we're taking a break. And we're back. And we're back with the Clown Award, one of our regular weekly features, given as always for meritorious stupidity. And this week, the winner of the Big Red Nose is the American people. And I don't say that because of the election results, even though I'm tempted to. But those results were pretty much as expected and as predicted. And if I make the incredibly bold, and I might even say daring assumption that the Democrats know how to play political hardball, and yes, I am suppressing a laugh as I say that, but assuming that, things actually probably won't be a whole lot different in D.C. for the next couple of years. The only difference will be the party doing the filibustering. At the same time, it is possible, don't count on this, but there is a tiny hypothetical possibility that there could be some small steps on some matters worth doing, such as immigration reform, because now that the Goppers are in control of the Senate and can take credit for it, they might be willing to do some things that basically everybody agrees on, which before, though, they filibustered because they didn't want the Democrats to get the credit for it. On the other hand, if the Democrats do start playing hardball, and I remind the Goppers that it can still take 60 votes to pass anything these days, I suggest that you would amuse yourself by seeing how long it would be before the Goppers and Fox News start screeching about obstructionism when the Democrats start acting exactly the way the Goppers have been doing for the last 6 years. And then after that happens, make a guess as to how much longer it will be before the demand that the Dems stop being obstructionist becomes conventional wisdom in the mainstream media. Anyway, that's not why the American people are this week's clowns. Rather, it's because we as a people are easily manipulated, easily stampeded, and most of all, easily frightened. For all of our protestations of daring and courage, we are a timorous people, easily and readily scared of and by the world around us. For the latest evidence and for the actual source of this week's award, consider the current paranoia about Ebola. Now, Ebola is a severe disease, but it is not highly infectious until the symptoms are well advanced. In fact, you cannot catch Ebola from someone who is not showing symptoms. What's more, Ebola is not airborne. It is transmitted through direct physical contact with an infected person or with their bodily fluids, such as blood, and in fact, not even all their bodily fluids. For example, sputum does not appear to be a vector for transmitting the virus. Urine is not a vector for transmitting the virus, and it appears that vomit may not be. All that information, by the way, all of that is according to the Centers for Disease Control. And frankly, by the way, those healthcare workers who caught Ebola did so because they broke protocol. They did not follow the rules for dealing with an infectious patient. All right, now despite all that, despite all those facts from like the CDC, the people who really are the experts on this, despite all of this, according to a brand new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, 71% of Americans support a mandatory 21-day quarantine for health professionals who have treated Ebola patients in West Africa. This even if they show no symptoms, even if they test negative for the virus. Why? Just because. Just because, that is, we are so flipping easily scared out of our wits by the latest boogeyman, whatever it is, and now it happens to be Ebola. Republicans, in this poll, Republicans supported the mandatory isolation. Democrats supported it. Independents supported it. Every age group, every level of education supported it, with majorities ranging from 63 to 85%. Now, this question about mandatory quarantines really broke into the public discussion after the case of a nurse named Casey Hickox. She was forced to spend a weekend in an isolation tent outside Newark Airport in New Jersey solely because she was returning from dealing with the Ebola outbreak in West Africa on behalf of the CDC. This again, even though she was asymptomatic and tests showed no trace of the virus. After she got out of that tent by threatening to sue the state of New Jersey, she went home to Maine, which has a voluntary 21-day quarantine. But when she didn't voluntarily quarantine herself, because remember, she still showed no symptoms, the state went to court to try to force her to go along with this voluntary isolation. That effort failed. The court, relying on CDC data, shot down the state's demands in no uncertain terms. I am quoting the decision here. The court is fully aware of the misconceptions, misinformation, bad science, and bad information being spread from shore to shore in our country with respect to Ebola. The court is fully aware that people are acting out of fear and that this fear is not entirely rational. But of course, that the CDC, the court, none of that made a difference. None of that made a difference. In comments on the story, and I always say that when you go online, you read these stories, you want to see where the people really are at. You especially want to see the fanatics come out to play. Don't read the articles, read the comments. In the comments on these stories, Nurse Hickox was called, among other things, selfish, a disgrace to the profession, just wants her 15 minutes of fame, she's appalling, she should lose her nursing license, and I love this one, a terrorist comes in many different shapes and sizes. Somebody said she just wants to get on the talk shows. She was called the stupidest woman in the universe. That is just a tiny fraction of what she was called. One predictable and in fact predicted result of her experience of this sort of vituperation is that healthcare workers have become less willing to go to Africa to try to help contain the disease or to treat its victims for fear not of the disease, but of being stigmatized and quarantined as soon as they get back home. Doctors Without Borders, in fact, is already reporting precisely that chilling effect. The irrational fears about the disease are now serving to make it harder to deal with it. In fact, let me tell you just how bad this has got, okay? This really sort of sums this up. Susan Sherman was a religious education teacher at St. Margaret Mary School in Louisville, Kentucky. She's also a registered nurse and recently had been on a mission to Africa. Because of that, because she'd been to Africa, parents raised concerns, and the school wanted her to take a 21-day leave of absence and get a health note from her doctor. Realizing that she is now being stigmatized and labeled, she resigned rather than go through it. All right, here's the thing. This is a map of Africa, which I'm sure you can tell. The area in bright red on the west coast, the one further from me, that marks out Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. These are the nations where the Ebola outbreak is taking place. The area marked in the brownish red on the east coast, the one closer to me, that's Kenya, which is where Susan Sherman was. Now, among the nations where the Ebola outbreak is, the one that's closest to Kenya is Liberia. The capital of Liberia is Monrovia. The capital of Kenya is Nairobi. The distance from Monrovia to Nairobi is over 4,600 miles. That is more than 1,600 miles greater than the distance between Boston and Los Angeles. But due to pusillanimous paranoia and our appalling geographic stupidity, Susan Sherman is out of a job because some parents thought she was too close to Ebola because, Africa. We refuse to let facts penetrate the fear. We prefer to shiver and shake and quiver in a corner, sucking our thumbs. And then we wonder why right-wingers, whose entire shtick is, they're coming to get you, win elections. As individuals, Americans are truly wonderful people. But as a whole, we're a bunch of clowns. All right, finally for this week, we have our other regular weekly feature. It's the Outrage of the Week. You may have already heard about this. You may know something about it. It's been in the news some, but there may be some aspects that you don't know. This week, the outrage is this. This is the cover of Time magazine for November 3rd. It portrays a judge's gavel about to smash an apple alongside the text, "Rotten apples, it's nearly impossible to fire a bad teacher." Now, right away, you have a problem with that because the fact is, it's not nearly impossible to fire a bad teacher. You just have to fire them for cause. Media watchdog FAIR says that the cover, which insultingly depicts the teaching profession as full of rotten apples which need to be smashed, that said it might make you suspect that Time is engaging in some good old-fashioned teacher bashing. And the group says, you'd be right. A petition drive started by the American Federation of Teachers produced more than 100,000 names in less than a week, demanding Time apologize for the cover. Okay, and here's where the outrage starts to deepen. Nancy Gibbs, who was Time's managing editor, responded to this in the magazine by saying, quoting, "Union leaders are charging that by writing about legal efforts to remove bad teachers from classrooms with the cover line Rotten Apples, Time has insulted all teachers." Okay, that statement is a blatant lie. The petition here specifically objected to the cover, not the story. In fact, it said, quoting, "The cover doesn't even reflect Time's own reporting," and that the article itself, quoting again, presents a more balanced view of the issues. So for Time to claim that petition supporters, or should I say union leaders, who are apparently the only ones involved here, for Time to claim that the petition says that writing about efforts to get rid of bad teachers is an insult is again a blatant lie. But it gets even worse because the petition was too kind to the article. The article is about a small group of very rich Silicon Valley tech giant millionaires who, despite lacking any educational expertise or experience, have decided that they are the ones who can fix America's supposedly broken public school system, and the way to do that is to attack teacher tenure. The system that says that after a certain point, after a certain length of time on the job, a teacher can't be fired except for cause. Now, what got this started? What gave them the idea that this is our educational panacea? Well, David Welsh, one of those millionaires, says he asked a big city California superintendent how to fix the schools and was blown away by his answer, which was, "Give me control over my workforce." In other words, a guy with power in the system says that the way to solve all the problems is to give him more power. I can see why these millionaires so identified with that. Now, Time does admit that teacher tenure used to be important, noting that before tenure laws, quoting the article, a teacher could be fired for holding unorthodox political views or attending the wrong church, or for no reason at all if the local party boss wanted to pass the job on to someone else. Now, apparently, Time wants us to believe all of that is in the past. It's all in the past. There's no more job discrimination. No one gets fired for their political views or their religious views. No one gets fired for being homosexual. No one gets fired because somebody wants to give the job to somebody else or because they're a thorn in the side of the bosses. That's all in the past. Just doesn't happen anymore. But the worst thing of all about this is that after going on and on about the supposed flood of new academic research backing up the millionaires' attacks on tenure, the article admits in the 27th paragraph of a 28-paragraph article that the methodology involved in this flood of new academic research is at best questionable and may be meaningless, if not downright bogus. So Time magazine, after drooling and fawning over a bunch of very rich elitists who were going to repair public education, in an article that did not quote a single teacher or a single union leader, but did manage to include comments from a researcher for a conservative education think tank and someone from the right-wing American Enterprise Institute, an article that never even hinted once at the connection between attacks on tenure and right-wing attacks on the teachers' unions themselves, and how the former is just the wedge to attack the latter. After all of that, Time gets around to mentioning that the whole anti-tenure enterprise may be based on vapor. And it illustrates that with a picture of a gavel about to smash a supposedly rotten apple. The whole thing is at best journalistic malfeasance, and it is an outrage. And that's it for this week. We're going to get out of here. You just have the best week you possibly can. We will see you next week. Peace.